Bada bing, bada boo.
It's almost like a game that the lab techs at animal research centers have to play. It's like a sad, sick game of death, that is. If there's a green tag, the animal must die. A lab tech at one of the research centers is walking down the row of shelves, scanning the lined up cages of mice that are used for research experimenting to study Hebrew. Part of the service was going to be in Hebrew, and Annie is Vietnamese American, and her fiance is Jewish, so she wants to learn Hebrew, and she just wanted to do something special, so she started embroidering and hand beading her own veil. She spent a lot of energy crafting the perfect wedding registry. One of the options being, instead of buying us gifts, you could opt to donate to the I Have a Dream charity, a charity that supports low-income students pursuing higher education.
Wow.
She spent a lot of time thinking about her wedding on Sunday because it was going to be a moment that she would share with Jonathan forever. Annie told her friends during a rehearsal a few months back, "I've never felt this depth of love for anything or anyone before." But now it's September 12th, the day before the wedding, and Annie is still missing. Her fiance, Jonathan, rushes in from New York because that's where he lives. And yeah, he was suspicious initially for the sole reason that he's her fiance. The Connecticut State Police officer said, everyone's a suspect. Loved ones, friends, the last person with them, you got to keep an open mind. The detectives questioned Jonathan. They checked his alibi, his location, administered a polygraph test, and they concluded, quote, there was no reason to believe Jonathan was involved in any way. Even just by looking at Jonathan, they could tell, this is a man who looked like he was on the verge of losing one of the only things in his life that mattered to him. Many investigators describe when loved ones go missing, there's almost a hollow look in people's eyes. They're not really looking at the investigators. They're kind of looking past them, or they're lost in their thoughts. Maybe they're running through all the scenarios or where they could be, or probably running through how they'll never recover if their loved one is not found. Their lips usually have this strange tightness to them. If you accidentally bump into them, it feels like they're going to lose it. A sob is just going to come out. It seems like they're holding so much pressure in their mouth to stop from screaming or crying. And you can almost see in their eyes, in the span of even just a few seconds, they're flashing between anxiety, utter life-altering fear, sheer panic, to disassociating and being in a state of emotionless shock. And it's just nonstop back and forth between these 5 different crazy strong emotions. The alibi and the polygraph, obviously, are what the authorities went off of, but I'm sure that they could look at Jonathan and know that he wasn't involved. Or they could have just asked any one of their friends about it. I mean, if you asked anyone about their relationship, that would be all it took. The odds of Annie and Jonathan even finding each other, it was kind of wild. Annie was supposed to be 340 miles away from Jonathan for college. She applied for Princeton. After high school, she applies to Princeton, which is one of the best schools for undergraduate research programs. They spend nearly $400 million every year in funding research, which is exactly what Annie wanted to do. But they rejected her. She was devastated. So devastated, in fact, that she sent a fully clothed picture of her butt to the dean of admissions. You know what? I feel like I could appreciate that, to just loosen up from such a serious job. I feel like the dean could appreciate that. And then she applied to 102 scholarships. Because her parents are Vietnamese immigrants, and her mom owned a nail salon. They didn't do that well. She didn't want to burden them with paying for her college tuition. So she hand-filled out 102 different scholarship forms so that her parents would not have to worry about her. She said, my tongue is sore from licking envelopes, my wrist hurts from typing and stapling, and the post office clerk knows me on a first-name basis. But other than that, there's nothing I can complain about. She received $160,000 in scholarships. She basically got a full ride to the University of Rochester in New York, which is where she meets Jonathan. And they were introduced by a mutual friend, and it was pretty clear from day one. Annie is a one-in-a-century type of person. And it's not because she's smart. I mean, everybody at the University of Rochester, everybody at Yale, all these places, they're smart. John and his friend would walk into Annie's dorm, and she would be studying, shopping for 5-inch heels, stilettos, talking to her friends, all simultaneously. And then at the end of the night, because she's 4'11", she would get on her tippy-tippy toes and kiss everybody on their foreheads goodnight. I mean, she was just so fascinating to be around. She had these things, like I said, called Annie-isms. Okay, so let me give you an example. She would have a lab schedule that everyone knows is going to be very messy. Maybe they're dissecting an animal. So most people, they show up jeans or sweats. She would show up in flowy skirts. And her professor would even joke with her, you're crazy for that. And she would just shrug. Today is Skirt Friday. I always wear skirts on Friday. She knows how to make a quick, witty joke, and her favorite food is Popeye's fried chicken. She is the type to take a bite of fried chicken, joke about her love life, and then immediately open up this brown leather notebook that she never went anywhere without, and then make a breakthrough in her research in a study of molecular basis of osteoarthritis and bone tissue engineering. at a Popeyes.
Wow.
Annie's friend said about her, I don't know anyone else who could wear 5-inch heels while doing laborious mouth surgery, eat fried chicken, not gain an ounce, use smiley faces in her PowerPoint presentations, and not lose the respect of her audience. So yeah, it seemed kind of inevitable that Jonathan would fall in love with her. He would wait outside for all of her classes at the University of Rochester. He would carry her books around campus. And then after undergrad, Annie gets accepted into Yale for a doctorate in pharmacology. Jonathan gets accepted into Columbia for a doctorate in applied physics and mathematics. And after the excitement of both of them getting accepted into their dream schools, it's like, okay, what are we supposed to do now? Because that's almost a 2-hour drive away from each other, and they're going to be busy with, it's not even 2 hours and they have all this free time. They would have almost no time. Jonathan encouraged her. He's like, I never want to feel like your career comes second. We're going to make it work. So they both sat there and they promised each other that they were going to talk as often as they can. They're going to see each other as often as possible. They even agreed. And this is just now. Soon they're going to be together forever. That's the plan. That was the plan when Jonathan got down on his one knee and proposed in the park. It was like the perfect day. It was such a low-key proposal, but it was perfect. They had eaten chocolate for dinner. And they actually spoke on the phone every single night. Even if it was just to like put each other on the background while they're studying, they'd be on the phone. And their favorite though was to hop on Skype and watch baseball games together. And the friends would tell the authorities the day before the wedding, I just remember telling Annie, you really did good, you know? You did good, girl. You found someone. You found someone who really appreciates you. They're long distance, but they weren't really long distance. They were in constant communication. Until Tuesday, September 8th, Jonathan never got a call back from Annie. They had this whole date scheduled for 7 p.m., a Skype date where they would just video call each other, and she missed it. And now it's the day before the wedding. There's all these registry presents arriving at their house, and they don't know what to do. The day before Annie's wedding, the 12th, the detectives find something that would shift the entire focus of the case. They walked into G22. So this is a storage room just a few steps away from G13. So G13, G22. And the plan was just to conduct another sweep of the entire floor for anything that seems out of place because the whole blood on the cardboard box. And the detective said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to turn off all the lights in every single room. We're all going to get down real low on the ground and we're going to use our flashlights on the floor. We're going to look for anything. The officers all drop on the floor. They start looking under because every single room in this building does have all those steel shelving units. It's not even just up against the walls. They're like, it's like aisles of shelves. There's a ton of dust, random trash that's falling on the ground and like lazily got kicked under, out of sight, out of mind. Wait, hold on. They find something. They find a small red bead. A bead. Like the ones that you would find on a beaded necklace. And this was huge because this is Annie's necklace. She was seen wearing it that day when she walked into the lab, but she had never been in room G22 that day. So why would her necklace, first of all, be broken? And second of all, why would it be found under a shelf in G22?
What's in there? G22.
It's just a storage unit, so storage supplies. I don't think that there's any mice. There's no reason for her to be in there. I guess if you need extra printer paper, extra scissors, extra tools. But she already had everything she needed in G13. Now, the officers, they hear more commotion outside. Another detective came across even more incriminating evidence in the hallways. There was a laundry bag found outside with a blue pair of sweatpants with dark red stains on them. Dried blood. So
How did they just finding this?
Yeah. So they got to keep looking, okay? When the officers walk back into storage room G22, there's a lot of things catching their eyes. You know, there's rows of those steel shelves stocked with lab equipment. They probably have to open each of the boxes to sort through, make sure nothing was hidden or thrown into one of these storage boxes. And one of the investigators is scanning through every part of that room, under the shelves, behind the table, on the walls, under the chairs. Is there anything that they missed? He's about to turn around and walk out when for some reason he feels something weird above him. And you know when you catch something in your peripheral vision as you're walking, it's such a passing little like, oh, what was that? I feel like I saw something, or that was kind of unsettling. Your brain catches, it's not consistent, but you almost keep walking because it's in your peripheral. And he stops and he walks back 2 steps and he looks up. It's an interesting human quirk, actually, that when we walk into a room, typically we never look up. We're so focused on everything eye level. But when he looks up, one of the ceiling tiles is slightly crooked.
Wow.
He calls for his colleagues and he points to it. They grab a ladder and one of the detectives pushes up the tile with his gloved hands. They poke their heads up into the little space, and tucked away in the ceiling is a single white sock and a single blue rubber glove with bloodstains on them. The two investigators said they were momentarily speechless in that moment. I mean, they had been searching this building for the past 4 or 5 days, the same 120,000 square feet over and over and over again. They had been retracing, retracking, researching the same 120,000 square feet. And in this tiny little storage room in the basement, G22 was a full-blown crime scene right in plain sight. Sunday morning, September 13th, the day of Annie's wedding, there was something going on inside the building at 10 Amistad, the Yale Animal Research Center. I mean, for the past 5 days, there had been a lot of activity there, and this whole case of the Yale grad student being missing was all over the news. But this morning, Sunday, it was weird. It was almost like something secretive was underway. Squad vans belonging to the New Haven Police Department, Connecticut State Police Department, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, they were driving down the ramp into the basement. They did not have their sirens on, but one after the other, it was just cop car, FBI car, cop car, driving into the building. Around the other side of the building, a group of canine dogs were being led in through the loading dock. Their tails are straight out. They're not wagging, they're not tucked. That means they're laser focused. They're working. On every corner of that building, there was a trooper car parked with an officer in the driver's seat scanning the street. Alert, watching for any sort of activity. Every door and entrance to that building had an officer standing guard, back straight, unapproachable. Something is going on inside of 10 Amistad. Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. Investing sounds really intimidating. If you're anything like me, you can get easily overwhelmed, especially when it comes to making financial decisions, especially something as high commitment as investing. So I kept putting it off because I just had so many doubts. Where do I start? What if I do it wrong? And thanks to Acorns, I realized that investing doesn't have to be that complicated or even that expensive. You don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invest your money for you. It makes investing feel much more simple and doable, so you can actually take your first step today. Head to acorns.com/rotten or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. Client testimonial may not be representative of all clients. Tier 4 compensation provided. Compensation provides an incentive to positively promote Acorns. View important disclosures at acorns.com/rotten. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Please consider your objectives, risk tolerance, and Acorns fees before investing. Acorns Advisors LLC, Acorns, is an SEC registered investment advisor. Brokerage services are provided to clients of Acorns by Acorns Securities LLC. Member FINRA SIPC. For more information, visit acorns.com. There were 100 or so investigators inside the building. I mean, every single one of them knew what day it was. It's Sunday. It's Annie's wedding day. And they are still looking for her. And after spending 5 days looking for Annie, after learning about everything that Annie was doing at work, but also about her personal life, talking to her fiance, family, friends, all of her family flew in from California, the investigators felt like they almost had this duty to bring her home, and today was supposed to be her day. One of the officers said, I was knocking on the walls at one point. I was knocking on the walls, hoping that I would get a knock back, some kind of noise. I was hoping that we would find her. I was hoping that she would be somewhere tied up or she was incapacitated and we could have this happy ending. Sunday, it was eerily quiet in that building. Officers were focused on what they were doing. Most of them had this big piece of paper in their hands, blueprints to the entire building. They were searching, or honestly, it looked like they were hunting, when one of them stops, just like stops halfway in the middle of a step. He looks up at his colleagues. It's gone. It was like a whiff he got for 2 seconds, and then it's gone now. Decomp. I smelled decomp. All the officers, they start poking their heads up, trying to crinkle their nose and smell as deeply as they can, and they're turning down their radios as if silence is going to help them smell better. A lead detective said, since the day we first stepped into that building, it smelled like animal decomposition. It was not pleasant. But this wasn't that. This was human decomposition, which is very different. And anybody who's done this type of work can tell you, as soon as they smell it, they know there's a dead body somewhere.
Really? It's that distinct?
Distinct. Very distinct. I tried to look into it, and a lot of people say that humans smell definitely sweeter than animals. Animals have more of what you would consider that rotten scent. Like, I guess if meat goes bad in the fridge. That was a thing. A lot of people said that animals kind of smell like a raw piece of beef gone bad in the fridge or left out in the sun. But humans smell like if that raw piece of meat was soaked in expired honey and then left to sit out. It's kind of a sickly sweet undertone. But as quickly as the smell comes, it would just like disappear. It's not like the smell was lingering. And if they walk a little left, it gets a little weaker. If they walk a little right, it gets a little bit stronger. Ooh, let's pinpoint the smell. No, they would walk into a room, smell it, and then it would disappear. Like someone sprayed perfume, then quickly purified the air and then left. The research lab throughout the entire building had a state-of-the-art ventilation system that cost millions of dollars to keep the air as sterile as possible.
Oh, and they can't even shut it off.
No, so the air is ventilating. So it's like chasing a disappearing scent that keeps floating around the building, but you have no idea where the source is coming from. It's almost like if there is a place, a ventilation that you spray perfume in and you don't know where it is, but it's now coming into all the rooms. It felt like it was taunting the investigators. One of the lead detectives said, the million-dollar question since the day she went missing is, where is she? She disappeared in a multi-million-dollar lab building with a multi-million-dollar ventilation system, several floors, several rooms, several locations. Where is she? In this one building on 10 Amistad, you have some of the world's leading scientists. I mean, the ones that are likely going to change the trajectory of modern medicine and how humans perceive and feel diseases. You have some of the world's brightest minds on campus, where students at Yale have an average IQ of around 125. In that specific building, right now, well, not right now, but then you had the leads, the head investigators from New Haven Police Department, Connecticut State Police Department, the Federal Bureau of Investigations. And all of this would come down to Max. Max is going to be the one to find Annie Lay. Max is a 90-pound German Shepherd. And Max is only trained to react to one thing: human remains. But maybe he's having an off day because he's dragging the officers straight into one of the bathrooms on the basement floor, right across from G22, the storage room, past this bright blue door and into one of the metal door stalls. Max is like dragging them. They're following him, and then he just stops. He sits inside the middle of a bathroom stall. The investigators are looking at Max. I mean, his bottom is touching the ground. He's sitting. That's his signal. He's sitting and he's staring. But it doesn't make any sense. They look at Max and they look at what he's signaling at. He's staring directly at the wall. The wall. The lead investigator on this case said, everyone expects police to be like robots. But every single person on that case looking for Annie Lay was completely shaken when we had to tell the family that we found her body. When we told her fiance that there wasn't going to be a wedding and that she was dead and that she had been killed, we were shaken. One of the investigators, I mean, of course they would never actually do this, but they had a brief fleeting thought of, what if we just wait a day? Because today was supposed to be their wedding day. And there were so many loved ones. I mean, so many of them had flown in for the wedding and they were waiting for any and all word from the police. On Wednesday, September 9th, the day after Annie vanished, Annie's uncle got a call from the family that Annie was missing. He was alone at the time. He's in California. He's frantically calling Annie, emailing her. He's going into full panic mode. He's completely distraught. I mean, there was no way to calm him down. He's getting anxious. This is his beloved niece, and his wife comes home and she's comforting him, and she's not emotional at all because she is 1,000% confident nothing happened to Annie. What do you mean? She was so committed that she packed their bags for them with their wedding outfits. And they flew to New York. And she was like, we're going to have a good time at the wedding. Don't stress, honey.
Wow.
They fly into Connecticut. And 2 days later, on the day of the wedding, with their wedding outfits still packed in their suitcase, they were all told of the news. Annie Lay's family and her fiance, Jonathan, were alerted that her body was found in the basement wall of the research lab. Instead of walking down the aisle to his new wife, Jonathan would be walking down the aisle to her casket. I will say that Jonathan is very quiet in this entire case. And even afterwards, I know that in maybe other cases, people would have been like, oh my gosh, why is he so quiet? But it's so clear he's so devastated. I mean, we don't know his exact reaction, the exact time that he was told Annie's body was found. But every time that he is seen out at the funerals mainly, he's basically the embodiment of grief. He looks like a ghost. I mean, just completely pale, like he's going to disintegrate into thin air, like he's going to evaporate. He can barely talk. He just alternates between crying and then staring at the ground, zoning out, maybe trying to disassociate. He honestly looks like a completely broken man. His little sister, Lauren, cried, "This isn't easy for us because it wasn't the plan." She said that she was so happy for Annie to be her sister, and they were already doing sister things. They were already going shopping and gossiping and doing these things together. And now she's just gone. And Lauren is saying that, yeah, I mean, there is so much grief for her, but also we have so many long days ahead. And I pray that my brother can recover from Annie's loss. Annie didn't deserve this. Again, we don't know exactly how Annie's family reacted to the news of her body being found either, but one of her little brothers has described the whole family as going into shock. Annie had a lot of younger cousins who were all there for the wedding, and a lot of them were at a very unfortunate age. So they were old enough where they could fully comprehend that she was dead and killed, but they were not old enough to know how to cope with such a high level of intense grief and shock. I mean, not that I think anyone ever learns how to be even as an adult, but it was such a tricky age. Like most of them are like 13, 16. So they all had flown in for Annie's wedding, and now they're all sitting there quiet and confused. And sometimes they would just look over at one of the youngest cousins, and he would just be sitting there quietly playing with the stuffed teddy bear. And he's too old to play with stuffed teddy bears, but this one was really special because Annie had given it to him for being her ring bearer. He was supposed to bring the rings up that day for the wedding. But there was going to be no wedding, and all he had left of Annie was this teddy bear. Jonathan would be seen wearing a wedding band on his left finger that it seemed he did not want to take off. In one of the stalls of the basement bathrooms, there is this white square on the white wall. It's like kind of blends into the wall. It's almost the size of a computer screen. Like your laptop screen, maybe 8 to 10 inches wide at most. And there's a tiny little knob on the right side. It looks like one of those utility panels where you have shutoff valves for water and gas. There's some insulation on the inside, but you're basically looking at the inside of a wall. Like it's not finished. There's no drywall inside. There's foam, there's insulation, there's dust, there's debris, and then there's like piping that you can see everywhere and shutoff valves.
I see, yeah.
It's basically a hole into the wall. The space inside is not that big. Imagine a few shoe boxes stacked on top of each other, maybe 3 shoe boxes stacked on top. It's tiny. The officers carefully unlatch and open the door, and in between the water pipes, the yellow insulation foam, was the body of a brilliant Yale graduate student. I tried to find a better word to describe what the officers found, but most of the investigators use this word because I don't think that there's really a better way to describe it. Annie Lay had been shoved, like stuffed into the tiny little space inside the wall. Her body was upside down. It appeared as if someone was maybe even trying to kick her body in, like using all brute force to force her body into this small space. There were pipes and cables inside the wall that her body was contorted around. I mean, it was very clear whoever did this obviously had no regard for her dignity and her body. They pushed her body into this small, tiny space with only one thing in mind: hiding her body. At 5 p.m. the day of Annie's wedding, the search was called to an end. This would have been around the time of her very first dance with her husband. But instead, Annie Lay was found in the wall. The state of her body is pretty grim. She was wearing one surgical glove, a match to the single glove found in the ceiling of storage room G22. She had only one white sock on, a match to the single white bloody sock found in the ceiling of storage room G22. Her beaded necklace was broken around her neck. Little beads were found inside of her clothing, which was a match to the tiny red bead found in G22. Her bra was pushed up above her chest. Her underwear was pulled down to her ankles, and male reproductive fluids were found in her panty liner. She had been essayed before her murdered. Underneath Annie's body, something of interest was found. Inside the wall, under Annie, was a green pen. A friend of Annie said, "Whoever did this took away a precious life, a life of an individual who had so much potential, who could have changed the course of history, who could have contributed to developing a drug that would have saved millions of lives, and they took away a treasure. They took away someone who could have really made a difference in so many people's lives." So now it is up to the investigators to find out who did it, and there was no way to even get Annie Lay out. The opening of the door was so small, there was no way to get her out without further causing more damage to her body. So they had to go to the other side of the wall and break down the whole wall. They wanted to be as careful as possible with Annie Lay's body to not only preserve the integrity of the evidence, but also to preserve the dignity of Annie Lay. When the autopsy was performed, it was concluded that Annie was killed by traumatic asphyxia via neck compression, aka suffocation. She had a broken jaw and collarbone, which was sustained prior to her passing. There was bruising inflicted on the back of her head. The autopsy was quite difficult to perform as Annie's body had been decomposing for 5 days now, and additionally, she was placed inside the wall upside down. So a lot of the fluids and natural gases that are formed and released during decomp, they had all rushed down towards her head and upper torso. They were able, however, to pull 3 DNA profiles, 1 that belonged to Annie and 2 male DNA profiles. The first step was to run both profiles through the CODIS database, and only one of them was a hit. I mean, it had to be someone that she knew, right? One student speculated, another student, someone who knew her schedule and knew where she was, someone that she wouldn't have been afraid of when she was in the lab. That's who did this. One of the 2 male DNA profiles come back as a match to a man named Chris Robinson. He was in the CODIS database for a drug felony charge 8 years ago, and on the database, his address is listed and it's near the research lab. But the problem is, can dead men kill?
What?
Chris Robinson was shot and murdered 2 years before Annie was found in the basement wall.
What?
This is a dead man.
That means he's not dead.
He was never a student at Yale. He never worked as a lab tech. He had no relations to Annie prior to his death. And he's dead. So how did his DNA get on Annie? They had to verify. The police went through a lot. They had to verify that he's actually dead. He's actually dead. Okay, a twin. What? Twins have identical DNA sequences, so it could be a twin. No, Chris Robinson is confirmed to have no twin. Other relatives, ruled out. Lab contamination errors, ruled out. Everything was ruled out to the point that this DNA almost felt planted. How does a dead man's DNA get into the walls of a secured Yale research lab on a deceased body? A case of secret history by Donna Tartt. I don't know, Ivy League students harming one of their own. Maybe this is pure Ivy League jealousy. Maybe she discovered something that she wasn't supposed to in research, because even in the world of Yale, Annie Lay was a force to be reckoned with. Because this feels like a setup. I mean, how does a dead man's DNA end up on her body? Do you know how to spell the word genius? Genius. Okay, if you spelled it correctly, you can probably beat a 10-year-old at a casual spelling bee in America. That is on the list of challenging spelling words for 9 to 10-year-olds. Annie's uncle was anticipating winning the round of Scrabble because he's playing against 10-year-old Annie. She probably doesn't even know how to spell giraffe correctly. But halfway into the game, Annie's letter rack is empty. She used up all her tiles, which means she won. And the last word she put down is czar. C-Z-A-R. Definition: a person appointed by the government to advise on and coordinate policy in a particular area. No, wow. Czar is spelled with a T, not a C. T-S-A-R, not C-Z-A-R. No, T-S-A-R is an emperor of Russia before 1917. And just like that, a full adult uncle was beat by the great Annie Lay. And ever since high school, Annie stated that she loved cell biology, which is so fascinating because I don't think I even knew what those words meant in high school. She was just fascinated on getting to know how things worked on a microscopic level. She graduated high school with a 4.28 GPA. She was valedictorian of her class, which somehow she still managed to have free time. She spent that volunteering at Marshall Medical Center. She was named Volunteer of the Year Award. And one fellow volunteer said, I mean, you can't help but love her, right? At her young age, how confident she is. Not all kids at that age are smart and driven and have friends. I mean, she has it all. We had this joke when she was volunteering that she could do a calculus problem quicker than she can wash a bottle, but she would happily wash all the bottles. In high school, Annie was voted most likely to be the next Einstein and the best of the best. So clearly, there is a lot to be jealous about when it comes to Annie Lay. But as incredible and as intelligent as she is, Annie was truly so likable. I mean, truly none of her peers and colleagues would even think about harming her. It just didn't make any sense. So that was thrown out. The only other solution to that DNA being on her was 2007 and the summer months. 2007, a massive project gets started in New Haven, Connecticut. I mean, nobody really knows exactly what's being built. I mean, it's not a big secret. You could probably look it up, but nobody wanted to do that. It's a research facility for Yale University, and the whole construction process was a huge ordeal. The building, it's going to have a rainwater collection system on the roof. The water is going to be treated, used to flush toilets, provide irrigation for the building. They had hundreds of people working on the building, skilled tradesmen, electricians, plumbers, general laborers. And on that long list of people, Chris Robinson. The odds of this happening are insane. But years ago, Chris Robinson worked on the construction of the lab, the research lab, building it. He's building the lab. He's sweating through the 2007 Connecticut summer heat. His sweat beads drip down into the area where the electrical panel was. They seal up the drywall. What? Climate control kicks in the lab because this is a state-of-the-art facility where the temperature has to be maintained at a very cold level at all times. And all of that manages to preserve Chris's DNA, keeps it absolutely pristine, sweat bead.
Wow. So that's how, but when was this? When was this case?
He was building it 3 years before Annie passed. And then he was killed a year after the construction.
Oh, so he built it, left DNA, and he was killed how?
He was shot and murdered at a bar, unrelated. Yeah, it was I believe a gang violence situation.
Wow.
His DNA was pristine, and once Annie's body was placed into the wall, years later, his DNA was transferred to her skin and underwear. So now the authorities just have one DNA profile to go off of, and they have a pretty good idea of who they think it belongs to. The last person to see Annie alive. 2 days after Annie went missing, a lab tech actually walked up to an investigator and started making small talk with them. Are you guys looking for Annie? Oh yeah, I knew Annie. I actually saw her yesterday. Yeah. She left the building during the fire drill. I don't know if she left, but I saw her grab her things, her notebook, a big bag of mouse food, and walked out with everyone. I don't know where she was going with that mouse food, though. The lab tech that told the police that, his name is Raymond Clark, the fiance of Jennifer, fellow Yale lab tech. Raymond has been working at Yale for the past 5 years. He's basically grandfathered in, if you will. Okay, that's a bit dramatic. But his sister is a Yale lab tech. His brother-in-law is a Yale lab tech. His fiance is a Yale lab tech. It does appear that Raymond got the position due in part to the fact that so much of his family works there. Looks-wise, everyone said Raymond looked so meek that he looked like he couldn't even hurt a mouse. Some said if you passed him in the hallways, he would prefer to look at the floor rather than look at you. He just seemed very passive, almost. So why would this passive guy lie about seeing Annie leaving during the fire alarm when it was absolutely certain that she was dead before the fire alarm even went off? Investigators also noticed scratches on Raymond's face, left bicep. He had fresh bruises under his eyes, on his chest, arm, ear. There was this huge red mark on his shoulder that looked like a burn rash. There was a bruise the size of an oyster shell on his upper left arm. And he said